It's March 2023. You've spent 5 years saving for this moment. You're finally in Paris, the city of lights, the capital of romance, the place where Instagram promised you'd find berets, macarons, and pristine balconies. You step out of your hotel in the Latin Quarter, ready for your Emily in Paris moment. But instead of fresh croissants wafting through the air, a wall of stench hits you so hard you can taste it. You look down the street. This isn't a cobblestone path, it's a canyon carved from black plastic bags. Mountains of rotting garbage stretch 6 feet high as far as the eye can see. Rats, bold and utterly fearless, scurry over the mounds in broad daylight. This isn't a dystopian sci-fi movie. This isn't a report from a collapsed state. This is one of the wealthiest nations on Earth, paralyzed by its own people. Why? Because the government suggested that maybe, just maybe, people should work until they're 64. Welcome to the French economy, a system meticulously designed to be unreformable. Let's stay on that Parisian street for a moment, because nothing captures the French economic paradox quite like the great trash crisis of 2023. To understand why the French economy is rigid, combative, and drowning in debt, you have to understand the garbage. By mid-March 2023, over 10,000 tons of uncollected waste rotted on Paris sidewalks. That's roughly the weight of the Eiffel Tower, dispersed in festering heaps outside Michelin-starred restaurants and historic elementary schools. If this happened in Tokyo, the government would have resigned in shame. In New York, private contractors would have cleared it out by Tuesday. But in France? This garbage wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as intended. The garbage collectors weren't just passively staying home. This was tactical warfare. The CGT Union, remember that acronym, you'll hear it a lot, didn't just tell drivers to stay home. They physically blockaded the 3 main incineration plants serving Paris: Ivry, Saint-Ouen, and Issy-les-Moulineaux. Think about the logistics. It's not enough to stop collecting trash. You have to ensure no one else can collect it either. They parked trucks across gates. They set up burning braziers. They held the hygiene of 2.1 million Parisians hostage. The reason for this biohazard siege? President Emmanuel Macron had used a constitutional loophole to push through pension reform, raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. Let the absurdity of that sink in. In the United States, full retirement age is 67. In Germany, it's heading to 67. In the UK, it's 66. France was burning its capital to the ground to avoid moving the needle to 64. But here's where the story darkens, where we start seeing the true union trap. This strike wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a display of raw power designed to humiliate the state. During the height of the crisis, a tourist from Kansas stood outside the Louvre trying to photograph the glass pyramid, but the frame was blocked by mountains of trash bags ripped open by scavengers. She told a reporter, "I thought this was supposed to be the most beautiful city in the world. It smells like a dead animal." Meanwhile, a French garbage collector gave a quote that perfectly summarizes the mindset. "If Macron wants us to work 2 years longer, he can come and smell the reality of our work." There's grim poetry to that. But economically, it's suicide. The cost wasn't just the cleanup bill. Hotel reservations dropped by 25% that month. Restaurants, already struggling to recover from the pandemic, saw their terraces sit empty because nobody wants to sip $12 Chablis next to decomposing diapers. The Republic of Garbage reveals something deeper: the absolute weaponization of essential services. In most developed economies, there's a social contract that says, we can argue about money but civilization must continue. In France, that contract has a clause: if we don't get what we want, civilization is leverage. Paris has always had rats, an estimated 6 million, roughly 3 for every human. But during the strike, rats didn't just multiply. They became emboldened. The National Academy of Medicine issued warnings about leptospirosis, a bacterial disease spread by rat urine. Consider that. An advanced G7 economy, a nuclear power, a permanent UN Security Council member, was issuing medieval plague warnings because a trade union didn't like legislation. And here's the kicker: the government couldn't just fire the strikers. Remember when Ronald Reagan fired 11,000 air traffic controllers in 1981? That's chemically impossible in France. These garbage collectors are fonctionnaires, public employees with job security that would make a tenured Harvard professor jealous. The government tried to requisition workers, essentially a legal order forcing them back under threat of jail time. The police showed up at garbage depots at 4 a.m. to force gates open. The strikers fought back with physical scuffles. Police versus garbage men in the dark over the right to let the city rot. This standoff highlights our central thesis. The French economy is unreformable because the cost of reform exceeds the cost of stagnation. Macron calculated that the pension system was going bankrupt. He tried to fix it. The result was a literal mess that made global headlines and made France look like a failed state. If you're a foreign investor watching this on CNN, are you thinking, yes, I should build my next factory in a country where garbage men can shut down the capital for 3 weeks because they don't want to retire at the same age as German employees? Probably not. To understand how unions gain this power, the power to turn Paris into a landfill with zero consequences, we have to go back in time. Back to the ashes of World War II, to a secret meeting that wrote the holy scripture of the French welfare state. The year is 1944. Paris has just been liberated. American jeeps roll down the Champs-Élysées. People kiss strangers. Nazi flags burn in gutters. It's pure euphoria. But behind the champagne and cheering lurked a massive, terrifying problem. France was a ruin. Infrastructure bombed out. Economy non-existent. Society deeply fractured. You had collaborators who'd worked with Nazis and resistance fighters who'd spent 4 years blowing up trains and living in forests. Here's the crucial reality Americans often forget. A huge chunk of the French resistance wasn't fighting for democracy or capitalism. They were communists, hardcore, card-carrying, Stalin-admiring communists. They had the guns, the organization, and the street credibility. They bled for France. Now that the war was over, they expected payment. Not a pat on the back, a revolution. Enter General Charles de Gaulle. You know him? Tall, stiff, funny hat, nose that could smell compromise from 3 miles away. De Gaulle was a conservative Catholic military man who hated communism almost as much as he hated France being irrelevant. De Gaulle faced a nightmare scenario. He needed to rebuild the state immediately. But if he pushed communists too hard, France could slide into civil war. He needed to buy them off with a deal that would make them put down guns and pick up ballots. The result was a document called the Programme of the Conseil National de la Resistance. This is the sacred scroll of modern France. If you want to understand why the French economy is unreformable, understand this. For the French left and unions, this document isn't a policy paper. It's their Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and Bible rolled into one. The program had a beautiful poetic name, Les Jours Heureux, the Happy Days. Who could vote against Happy Days? The deal was simple but profound. In exchange for accepting de Gaulle's political leadership and not turning France into a Soviet satellite, communists and unions got to design the economic engine of the new France. They created La Sécurité Sociale, Social Security. But this wasn't like US or UK Social Security where government taxes you and sends checks when you're old. This was far more radical. The genius, or curse depending on your view, of the 1945 deal was gestion paritaire, joint management. The state wouldn't run healthcare and pension systems directly. Instead, these massive pots of money would be managed by independent boards composed of employer representatives and, you guessed it, unions. See the brilliance of this trap? In the United States, changing Social Security is a political fight in Congress. In France, the Social Security system is effectively a private fiefdom run by unions. It gave them power, funding, and legitimacy completely independent of government. French unions don't just negotiate wages. They manage the welfare state. They sit on boards controlling hundreds of billions of euros. This is why French unions are so powerful even though only about 8% of French workers are union members today. In the private sector it's even lower, around 5%. You might ask, if only 5% are members, how do they have any power? Because of 1945. Because of the sacred scroll. The system was rigged from day one to give representative unions a permanent seat at the table regardless of membership. This agreement established the fundamental dogma of the French economy. Social protection is not a cost to be managed. It is a fundamental human right that supersedes economic reality. The CNR program nationalized energy, major banks, and insurance companies. It established the right to work, retirement, and healthcare. And to be fair, for a long time it worked like magic. From 1945 to 1975, France experienced les 30 Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years. The economy boomed. The population was young. Plenty of workers paid in, very few retirees took out. It was a Ponzi scheme, sure, but in its early profitable phase. Everyone got richer, healthier. The social model became the envy of the world. It became the core of French identity. Ask a French person what makes them French and they won't say Napoleon or Versailles. They'll say, we don't leave our sick to die in the street like Americans. The social model became the secular religion of the Republic. But here's the problem with sacred scrolls. They don't update when the world changes. Fast forward to the 21st century. The baby boom is over. People aren't dying at 65, they're living to 85. The ratio of workers to retirees has collapsed. The economy has globalized. Nationalized industries have been privatized or open to competition. The math that made les jours heureux possible in 1945 is now mathematically impossible. The system bleeds money. But, and this is the unreformable part, you cannot explain math to a population viewing the system as moral victory over Nazism and capitalism. When Macron says, "We need to reform pensions to balance the budget," he thinks he's making an accountant's argument. But what the French public hears is, "I'm tearing up the legacy of the resistance. I'm spitting on the graves of heroes who liberated Paris." The unions, specifically the CGT founded by those same communists, view themselves as guardians of this temple. Any attempt to touch benefits negotiated in 1945 is viewed not as policy reform but as heresy. It creates psychological lock-in. If you suggest railway workers shouldn't retire at 52, which was real until recently, the counterargument isn't economic. It's you are dismantling the republic. This is why the French economy feels stuck. It's operating on code written in 1945 for a closed industrial Reconstruction-era economy. But because that code was written in resistance blood, no one's allowed to delete it. We have a modern digital globalized nation trying to run on a chassis built for a post-war communist compromise. And the people guarding that chassis aren't bureaucrats. They're descendants of those 1944 street fighters who spent 80 years perfecting the art of saying non. If the sacred scroll of 1945 is the religious text of the French left, then the CGT Confédération Générale du Travail are its warrior monks. And let me tell you, these monks don't take vows of silence. They take vows of noise, disruption, and burning tires. You cannot talk about the French economy without understanding this specific organization. In the US, we think of unions as the UAW negotiating contracts every 4 years or maybe teachers' unions lobbying for budget increases. It's bureaucratic, legalistic. The CGT is different. The CGT was effectively the industrial arm of the French Communist Party for decades. Though they formally cut ties in the 90s, the DNA remains. Their headquarters isn't just an office, it's a fortress of ideology. Their slogan isn't fair pay for fair work. It's basically class war until total victory. Here's the fascinating paradox. The CGT is bleeding members. Membership has dropped significantly over 30 years. By raw numbers they shouldn't matter. But in France, power isn't about membership numbers. It's about where those members are located. The CGT is a masterclass in what military strategists call asymmetric warfare. They realized long ago they don't need to organize sandwich makers or graphic designers. Those people striking doesn't hurt anyone important. Instead, the CGT focused all energy securing a stranglehold on the jugular veins of the economy: energy, transport, ports, and refining. Let's look at their playbook from the 2023 pension reform protests, because it's terrifyingly effective. The Robin Hood tactic. The energy branch of the CGT literally possessed the kill switch for the French economy. But they didn't just black out the country, that would turn the public against them. They got creative. They switched hundreds of thousands of homes in working-class neighborhoods to off-peak pricing all day long. They essentially gave free electricity to the poor. Simultaneously, they targeted specific buildings for blackouts. Offices of MPs who supported Macron. Homes of wealthy CEOs. The construction site of the Olympic Village for the 2024 Paris Games. Think about the level of control required. They could say, cut power to this specific zip code, but give free power to that housing project. It sends a chilling message to government: we control the grid. We're just letting you use it. The fuel choke. France has limited oil refineries. The CGT controls workers in almost all of them. When they strike, they don't picket gas stations. They blockade refineries. Within 3 days, gas stations run dry. Within 5 days, panic sets in. You see lines of cars stretching for miles. Nurses can't reach hospitals. Food trucks can't reach supermarkets. The entire country hyperventilates. The government then dips into strategic reserves, fuel stockpiles meant for war, just to keep ambulances running. This is blockade architecture. It's designed to inflict maximum economic pain with minimum participation. You only need 200 people to shut down a refinery supplying 10 million. Ultimate leverage. And here's the cultural element hard for outsiders to grasp: the merguez factor. If you go to a CGT protest, it's a sensory experience. There's a specific smell: burning flares and grilling merguez, spicy North African sausages. Trucks with massive sound systems blast techno or revolutionary songs. It's aggressive, loud, incredibly masculine. Less like contract negotiation, more like a tailgate party for a riot. But this militant culture creates massive economic distortion. Foreign companies are terrified. I once spoke to a logistics manager for a major American e-commerce company. Let's say they deliver everything from A to Z. He told me when they model European supply chains, they treat France as a high-risk zone, similar to unstable developing nations. They literally build bypass routes through Belgium and Germany to avoid the risk of French ports being blocked. Think about the cost. France has the best geographic location in Europe, Atlantic and Mediterranean access. It should be the logistics hub of the continent. But because dock unions hold ports hostage so frequently, shipping companies prefer Rotterdam or Antwerp and truck goods in. France loses billions in revenue simply because it cannot guarantee gates will be open Tuesday. The CGT's philosophy: the company doesn't belong to shareholders. It belongs to workers. Shareholders are parasites extracting value. So if the company goes under because of a strike, so be it. Better to die on your feet than live on your knees. There was a famous case with Goodyear Tire Factory in Amiens. The company wanted to save the plant by asking workers to work more shifts. The union refused. The CEO, an American named Maurice Taylor, wrote a leaked letter. The French workforce gets paid high wages but works only 3 hours. They get 1 hour for breaks and lunch, talk for 3 and work for 3. The French government was offended. The union was offended. But the plant closed. The jobs are gone. This brings us to the core problem. Blockade architects can win the strike but lose the war. They can force government to back down or keep a factory open another year. But they cannot force the global economy to care about France. Capital is a coward. It runs from noise. And the CGT is the loudest thing in Europe. If the CGT provides fireworks and noise, the CDI, Contrat à durée indéterminée, provides the silence. The silence of a small business owner staring at resumes, terrified to pick up the phone. To understand the French labor market, understand there are effectively two castes: the insiders and the outsiders. The insiders have a CDI. The outsiders do not. In the United States, employment is generally at will. Your boss can walk in Tuesday and say, "This isn't working out. Pack your things." Brutal. Stressful. But it makes the labor market fluid. Companies hire quickly because they can correct mistakes quickly. In France, signing a CDI isn't like dating. It's not even like living together. It's quite literally a Catholic marriage from the 1400s. Till death or retirement do us part. The CDI is an open-ended permanent contract. Once you pass your trial period, usually 3 to 4 months, you effectively own your job. Your position becomes property that cannot be taken without a drawn-out, expensive, psychologically draining legal war. Let's play a game. You're a small business owner in Lyon. You run a successful graphic design agency. You land a big client, so you hire a new designer. Let's call him Pierre. Pierre seems great in interviews. Nice portfolio. Charming. You sign the CDI. Trial period ends. Then transformation happens. Pierre stops hitting deadlines. Shows up at 10:30 a.m., leaves at 4:30 p.m. Spends 3 hours networking on LinkedIn. He's toxic to other employees. In America, you fire Pierre. Pay him 2 weeks severance if you're nice. Move on. In France, you're about to enter the 9 circles of hell. First, you cannot just fire him for poor performance. Being bad at your job often isn't enough reason to break a CDI unless you can prove insufficiency with a mountain of documented evidence over time. You must start a paper trail that would make a lawyer weep. Send registered letters with return receipts warning him of behavior. Summon him to a formal pre-dismissal interview. Allow him to bring a union representative or witness to this meeting. If you eventually pull the trigger, Pierre will almost certainly sue you in the prud'hommes, labor courts. The prud'hommes is a terrifying institution for employers. It's not presided over by professional judges. It's a tribunal of laypeople, half elected by employers, half by employee unions. Historically, they lean heavily toward workers. If the court decides firing was without real and serious cause, you don't just owe back pay. You owe damages, penalties. Until Macron reforms put a cap on this, which unions fought tooth and nail, payouts could be astronomical. Years of salary. I know a restaurant owner in Bordeaux who had a waiter who was rude to customers, dropped plates, and was generally terrible. The owner calculated the cost of firing him versus keeping him. It was cheaper to keep him on payroll, forbid him from talking to customers, and have him polish silverware in the back 8 hours a day. Think about the economic insanity. A business paying someone to not work because the legal system makes replacement too dangerous. This creates golden handcuffs. The employee is handcuffed to the job because quitting means losing accumulated rights and benefits. Unemployment benefits in France are generous, but only if you're fired or negotiate departure, not if you quit. The employer is handcuffed to the employee because divorce is too expensive. But the real victim of the CDI isn't the employer. It's the outsider. Because firing is so hard, hiring becomes Russian roulette. Every time a French company hires someone on a CDI, they're betting company survival that this person won't be a dud. So what do? They stop hiring. Or they only hire people with perfect profiles. Graduates from top schools, people with zero resume gaps, people who look and sound exactly like the boss. It destroys social mobility. If you're a kid from the banlieue suburbs with a funny-sounding name and a diploma from a lesser university, your resume goes in the trash. The risk is too high. This has created a generation of precarious workers. Since companies fear the CDI, they abuse the CDD, contrat à durée déterminée. This is a temporary fixed-term contract. Young people in France often spend their 20s bouncing from CDD to CDD, never knowing if they'll have a job in 6 months. They're the Kleenex generation, used and thrown away before they gain rights. And here's the deep cultural twist. In France, you are nothing without a CDI. Try to rent a Parisian apartment without a CDI. The landlord won't even look at you. Try to get a mortgage. Laughable. Try to get a car loan. Good luck. The CDI is not just an employment contract. It's your credit score, your social status, and your proof of adulthood. So you have this perverse system. First, unions fight to make the CDI untouchable to protect workers. Second, this makes companies terrified to give out CDIs. Third, this locks young people and minorities out of housing and credit markets. Fourth, youth unemployment stays stubbornly high, often double that of Germany or UK. Fifth, unions say, see? Capitalism is failing. We need more protections. It's a snake eating its own tail. I vividly remember a conversation with a 28-year-old French engineer named Thomas. Brilliant. Spoke 3 languages. Worked in aerospace. But he was on a contract via a consulting agency, not a direct CDI with the big manufacturer. He told me, I live with my parents. I make 45,000 euros a year, good salary here, but I cannot rent a studio in the city where I work because I don't have the holy grail permanent contract. I'm a ghost in the system. The irony is tragic. Laws designed to protect workers from market cruelty have created much crueler reality for anyone trying to enter the market. The insiders, older workers with CDIs, are protected in a fortress. The outsiders are left to scavenge in the gig economy or endless internships. If you took a piece of graph paper and plotted the size of every company in the United States, you'd see a relatively smooth curve. Millions of tiny companies, many medium ones, a few giants. It looks like a ski slope. Do the same for France and the graph looks like a cliff. You see massive numbers of companies with 47 employees, huge numbers with 48, staggering numbers with 49. Then at 50 the line drops off the face of the earth. There are 2.5 times more companies with 49 employees than with 50. This is not statistical anomaly. It's not coincidence. It's the result of the single most terrifying number in the French business code. In Silicon Valley, growth is religion. In France, growth stops at 49. Welcome to the social threshold. To understand why a French CEO would rather cut off his own arm than hire a 50th employee, you have to understand what happens the moment that 50th person signs their contract. Up until employee 49, you're running a business. You're the boss. You make decisions. You hire, you, with difficulty, fire, you buy new software, you reorganize. It's your ship. When you hire employee 50, you're no longer just running a business. You're suddenly running a democracy. And not a functional one, a highly bureaucratic adversarial democracy. Crossing the threshold of 50 triggers roughly 35 distinct legal obligations. The most significant, creation of a full-powered CSE, Comité Social et Économique. Don't confuse this with a suggestion box or friendly employee satisfaction committee you might find in a US tech startup. The CSE is a parallel government within your company. Once you hit 50, you're legally required to organize elections. Yes, actual elections with ballot boxes, secret votes, and competing candidate lists. Once this committee is elected, you, the owner, can no longer just do things. Want to change the shift schedule? You must inform and consult the CSE. Want to introduce new technology monitoring productivity? Inform and consult the CSE. Want to restructure a department? Inform and consult. This isn't a 10-minute chat. It's a formal legal process. You write reports. Schedule meetings. Send agendas 3 days in advance. Take minutes. If you fail to do this correctly, you commit delete d'entrave, obstruction. This is a criminal offense. A CEO can literally go to prison, though usually it's a massive fine, for forgetting to ask the committee's opinion on the new vacation policy. But it gets worse. You have to pay them to oppose you. The company is legally required to fund the CSE. You must give them a budget of 2% of total payroll for operating costs. Plus, in larger companies you fund their social works, cinema tickets, holiday vouchers, etc. But the real kicker is the expertise. If the CSE doesn't like your business plan, say you want to merge with a competitor, they have the right to hire an expert accountant to analyze your books and challenge your strategy. Who pays for this expensive expert? You do. Consider this: you're a CEO. You have a strategy. Your employees disagree. They hire a consultant to write a 100-page report explaining why you're an idiot. And you write the check to pay that consultant 30,000 euros. It's corporate masochism unique to France. And then there's the protected employee. Employees elected to the CSE and union delegates appointed by big unions gain protected status. Remember how hard we said it was to fire a normal employee? Firing a protected employee is nearly impossible. It requires explicit permission from the labor inspector. I interviewed a manufacturing CEO in Lyon named Antoine, not his real name. Antoine runs a precision parts factory. He has exactly 48 employees. He turns down orders. He refuses to expand. I asked, Antoine, you're leaving money on the table. Why not hire 2 more guys and take that contract? He looked at me like I was insane. If I hire 2 more guys, I trigger the threshold. The CGT will come in. They'll appoint a delegate. That delegate will likely be the guy who hates working most. He'll become untouchable. He'll spend 20 hours a month in delegation hours, paid time off to do union work. He'll demand audits. He'll stir up conflict. My HR director will spend 30% of her time managing the committee instead of talent. It will cost me 100,000 euros a year in compliance costs and lost productivity. That contract is not worth 100,000 euros. This is the 49-employee ceiling. It creates a structural deformity in the French economy. We have a missing middle. We have huge global champions, LVMH, Total, Airbus, with armies of lawyers to deal with unions. We have millions of tiny micro-enterprises. But we lack the middle stand, the army of robust mid-size companies powering the German economy. Because French companies don't grow naturally. They hit the glass ceiling at 49 and stop. To get past 50 you have to leap. You don't go from 49 to 50. You wait until you have enough orders to go from 49 to 70 in one shot, so the extra revenue covers the union tax. Or you cheat. French entrepreneurs are masters of corporate gymnastics. To avoid the threshold, they create holding structures. Instead of one company with 60 employees, Antoine creates Antoine Logistics, 20 employees, Antoine Manufacturing, 20 employees, and Antoine Sales, 20 employees. 3 legal entities, 3 payrolls, 3 bank accounts, all to ensure no single entity hits the magic number 50. The courts try to crack down by recognizing and unite économique et sociale. But it's a cat-and-mouse game. The result? A fragmented economy. Companies are inefficiently small. They can't achieve economies of scale because the regulatory cost of scale is too high. It's a tragedy. The very laws designed to give workers a voice are the primary reason thousands of workers are never hired in the first place. We've talked about garbage, unions, strikes, and politicians. But there's one character in this story that doesn't care about ideology. It doesn't care about the resistance. It doesn't care about the 35-hour week. And it certainly doesn't care about your feelings. It's the bond market. For the last 15 years, France has been living in a financial fantasy land. Interest rates were at 0 or even negative. This meant the government could borrow billions of euros effectively for free to pay for the social model, the subsidies, and peace treaties with unions. It was like having a credit card with 0% APR that never expired. France binged. But in 2022, the party ended. Inflation spiked. Central banks raised interest rates. Suddenly, that credit card has a 3 to 4% interest rate attached. Here's the terrifying math of the debt trap endgame. France hasn't passed a balanced budget since 1974. For 50 years, half a century, the French state has spent more than it earned every single year. The national debt is now pushing 3 trillion euros. That's roughly 112% of GDP. In the free money era, this didn't matter. The cost to service that debt, pay the interest, was negligible. But now, interest payments on the debt are becoming the single largest item in the French budget. By 2027, France will spend more on paying interest to foreign investors than on its entire defense budget. Soon it will spend more on interest than on education. Think about the insanity. The French taxpayer is working until late July to pay taxes, not to fund schools or hospitals, but to pay coupons to hedge funds in London and New York just to keep the lights on. And the sharks are circling. The credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, Moody's, are watching. They've already issued warnings. A downgrade in France's credit rating would be catastrophic. It would spike interest rates further, creating a snowball effect where debt grows faster than the economy can ever catch up. This is where the union trap becomes a death sentence. To pay down this debt, France needs to cut spending. But we just spent 5 sections explaining why you cannot cut spending. If you cut pensions, strikes. If you cut civil servants, strikes. If you cut healthcare, riots. So the government is paralyzed. It's driving a car toward a cliff, but the steering wheel is locked by unions and the brake pedal is disconnected by the 1945 Constitution. The only other option is to grow the economy. But you can't grow when taxes are at 45%. You can't fire anyone. And companies stop growing at 49 employees. This is the French paradox. The very protections designed to save the French way of life are mathematically guaranteeing its collapse. Investors are starting to look at French bonds with suspicion. They track the spread, the difference between the interest rate France pays and the rate Germany pays. For decades the spread was tiny. France was considered as safe as Germany. Now the spread is widening. The market is whispering, France is not Germany. France is Italy with nuclear weapons. If the bond market decides to stop lending to France or demands 6 to 7% interest, the game is over. The International Monetary Fund steps in. And the IMF doesn't ask politely for reforms. They impose them. Consider the yellow vests reacting to an IMF austerity package. It wouldn't be a protest. It would be a revolution. So why is the French economy unreformable? Because it's not just an economy. It's a religion. The French have built a society based on a beautiful, noble idea, that life should be about more than just work. That the sick should be cared for, the old respected, and workers should have rights. It's a model prioritizing stability over growth and equality over opportunity. And for a long time it worked. It created one of the highest standards of living in human history. But the bill for that paradise was pushed into the future. And the future has finally arrived. The union trap is the refusal to accept that the world has changed. It's the belief that you can vote against math. It's the belief that if you burn enough tires, the debt will go away. As you walk through Paris today, it's still breathtakingly beautiful. The cafes are full. The Seine sparkles in sunlight. But if you look closely, you can see the cracks in the foundation. You can smell the uncollected garbage. You can feel the tension in the air. France is facing a choice it's culturally incapable of making. Dismantle the sacred model of 1945 to save the country's future, or cling to the model and watch the country slowly sink into irrelevance, trapped in a museum of its own making. The tragedy is I think we all know which path they'll choose. They'll choose the romance. They'll choose the fight. They'll choose the non. Because in France, it's better to sink with panache than to swim like an Anglo-Saxon. But what do you think? Is the French model a glorious resistance against capitalism, or a suicide pact? If you were Macron, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into economic madness, destroy that like button. It's easier than firing a French employee. And make sure you're subscribed. We'll see you in the next video where we're going to look at the other sick man of Europe, Germany.